Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the world today. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says his Labour Party's by-election loss to reform in Runcorn and Helsby is disappointing. US Vice President J.D. Vance says the war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon, hours after the US signed a minerals deal with Ukraine. Plus, an activist ship headed towards Gaza is attacked by Israeli military. All aboard the ship are confirmed safe. Let's begin. The UK's Reform Party has gained control of several councils following by-election and mayoral election wins. The populist Reform, led by the veteran campaigner for Brexit, hopes Thursday local elections in England will mark the breakdown of a century of domination of British politics by the governing Labour Party and opposition Conservatives. In the most closely watched contest for the vacant parliamentary seat of Runcorn and Helsby, Reform won by just 6 votes after a full recount, given Nigel Farage's party its 5th seat in the House of Commons. Labour had won the seat in the last year's national election with a majority of almost 15,000. Farage, a longtime supporter of US President Donald Trump, has staked his anti-immigration party's claim to represent the right of British politics since the Conservatives lost more than half of their support in a general election last year. Well, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has admitted his disappointment after Nigel Farage hailed Reform's bombshell by-election victory over Labour in Runcorn and Helsby. Speaking to reporters during a visit to Bedfordshire today, Mr. Starmer said the result was disappointing and insisted he was determined to go further and faster in delivering change. Speaking to supporters, he said, "What I want to say is, my response is we get it. We were elected last year to bring about change." He says his party has started work such as bringing in measures to cut NHS waiting lists, adding that he is determined to go further and faster on the change that people want to see. Another official determined to continue work is Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who says she is determined to win back the public's trust and the seats her party has lost, saying, "The renewal of our party has only just begun. I'm determined to win back the trust of the public and the seats we've lost in the years to come." Let's bring in international affairs analyst Nathaniel Oguni, who joins us from London. Nathaniel, great to see you. How much of a reflection are these election results on the leadership of Prime Minister Keir Starmer?
Good afternoon. You look at the results for Labour in July and you look at their vote share now and it's tanked. I think it's an indictment of his leadership. And I think that's because he's made a number of unpopular policy moves. So he's taken away the winter fuel allowance, which is a payment that is made to elderly citizens in the UK to help them heat their homes over the winter, which can be quite expensive, particularly with elevated gas prices. He's taken a number of unpopular policy moves, and he's raised taxes on incomes, for instance. So I think these results show the unpopular moves coming through.
Indeed, and we have to apologize to our viewers. We had a wrong picture showing while you were talking. Now, the Prime Minister says he'll continue fulfilling his promise to the British public. It's also about the NHS. Clearly, his determination was not felt at the polls. Neither efforts made by his government in moving this progress further and faster has not been felt at the polls. What are people trying to say to him through the elections?
So I think people are not getting the change that they voted for last July. I think people are frankly disappointed. They're disappointed in the economic performance. So since Labour have come into office, the economy has slowed down. Inflation is now up. Inflation is at 2.6%, which is higher than it was before Labour came into office. He's had some difficulties to elsewhere. So even on social policy, he's had to make a number of U-turns in the light of pressure from the Reform or the Conservative Party. So I think the messages that people are sending is that fundamentally they're unhappy. When Labour was looking for votes in opposition, they made a number of promises, and now that they're in government, they have failed to live up to those.
Could US President Donald Trump's trade tariffs have had anything to do with the way people voted in this election?
Yes, I think so. I think the tariffs have had an impact on the UK economy. Clearly, disruption to global supply chains can cause difficulties. The OBR, who are the independent economic forecaster in the UK, have looked at the impact of potential tariffs and disruption to supply chains. They found that that would have a significant hit to the UK economy. But I don't think that Labour can really blame those. I think their difficulties started long before Donald Trump came into office. I think their difficulties started late last year, as I say, when they started taking away the winter fuel payments, when they made these moves that weren't very popular. I think that's the root of their issues.
How different are they from the Conservative Party, which also lost seats in the election as well? Leader Kemi Badenoch says she's determined to win those back and also win the public's trust.
Yeah, so I think Kemi will be disappointed by these election results, although I don't think they're a fatal blow to her leadership. I think Kemi will survive. I think she's likely to remain leader for quite some time, and I think she's moving in the right direction. So you look at her policy on migration, which has been polled to be quite popular with the general public. You look at her policy on justice, where she's forced the Labour government into a U-turn over some sentencing changes that they wanted to make. And so there have been successes in her leadership, although the loss of a number of councillors is, of course, disappointing.
Yeah, the loss of councillors, but isn't that still reflective of the kind of leadership she's provided for the party?
Yeah, so I think the difficulty here is that the last time a lot of these seats were contested was in 2021. And that was May 2021. That gave at the time the Conservative Party had a 20% or so lead in the polls. It was around the time that the vaccines were being delivered in the UK. And so the current government was very popular. They were up in the polls by about 20%. And that reflected in them winning so many seats that they wouldn't have usually won. And so as a result of that, even though the Conservative Party have lost a significant number of seats at this time, they are coming down from a previous high watermark as opposed to normal mid-term performance.
And the man of the moment is Nigel Farage of the Reform Party. I don't think he's ever had this many wins. I mean, the party itself, don't think they've had this many wins in an election, right?
Yeah, you're right. So Reform are looking significantly up. I think the counting is still ongoing, but they've got over 500 councillors across the country. So Reform are sort of heading upwards. I think they're capturing a lot of the dissatisfaction with Labour. There are a good number of voters who might have voted Conservative in the past, but voted Labour at the last election. And because they've been unhappy with the way Labour have been in office, they've now switched to Reform.
And how does this boost Nigel Farage's position politically? He's been seen sort of as a sort of a castaway, I think, in major elections. But now he's been projected to the front as a result of these polls. So does it put him in the same league with Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch, and all the big wigs of the other big political parties?
You ask a good question, but I think we have to remember the broader context. Reform as a political party now has 5 MPs in Parliament. You know, the Conservatives have over 120 and Labour many, many more. So context matters, right? And so I think you have to look at the wider representation within Parliament. I think there have been a number of issues for the Reform Party too. So Reform have had difficulties with one of their MPs who they ended up reporting to the police. He in turn accused them of corruption. So they're having legal challenges over that at the moment. Otherwise, Reform have struggled to set out a totally coherent policy message. So in some areas, they've talked about left-wing policies and raising state spending. In others, they've talked on the right and they talked about cutting taxes. And it's difficult to do both at the same time. I think it's easy to make those kind of comments when you're in opposition. But I think if you are trying to position yourself as a serious party in government, if you end up holding elected office, or if you end up in executive office, so if you end up as a mayor running a local council, something like that, then you have to make choices. And I think when they are forced to make those choices, some of the shine will come off.
And I think that maybe the dust of Brexit has probably settled because it was because of the Reform Party's campaign that Britain eventually left the European Union. And then later on, there was a lot of confusion about what exactly the modalities for Brexit will be, what Britain's relationship with the European Union would also look like. But Nigel Farage himself is a huge supporter of Donald Trump. And I think that, he mirrors the US president's ideals in the UK. How do people react to that?
So there are a few things there. I think Nigel Farage and Donald Trump are fundamentally similar politicians. In terms of their communications, you'll notice that they tend to speak in quite easy language. Keir Starmer has been criticized in the past for speaking like a lawyer because that's his background, but he is quite technical. He can sometimes be described as dry or less than interesting, but Nigel Farage is an incredible communicator. When he speaks, people listen. You look at his social media following, particularly on newer platforms like TikTok. He's got more followers on TikTok, I think, than the other two main party leaders put together. So he's got a very good communication style, and that very clearly cuts through. That is a similarity people see with Donald Trump. I think a difficulty for him, however, is that Donald Trump remains quite unpopular in the UK. And so if you link yourself or if you are seen as close to Donald Trump, then that can end up having quite negative impacts. Because generally speaking, if public sentiment against the US worsens, as we have seen it happen in the UK and in Canada equally, where they've just had some elections. But if we see public sentiment against the US worsening and Nigel Farage is seen as a character close to or similar to Donald Trump, then that can lead to some difficulties for him.
And I wondered how the younger generation voted in this election because they are very key to elections in most countries and where exactly they tend to lean to when it comes to polls.
So at this election, the voter turnout figures that we have so far, because their results are still being counted in many parts of the country, but the figures that we have so far suggest that turnout amongst young people was very low. Very few young people went to the polls for these local elections, and that is in line with a trend that we saw last year. Even at last year's general election, voter turnout for the under 30s and under 40s was lower than it was for the over 60s. Generally speaking, those in the under 30, under 40 bracket tend to support Labour. They tend to support the Green Party. They tend to support the Liberal Democrats. But actually, the Reform Party has had a lot of cut through with young men. So particularly young men who have seen Nigel Farage's style of communicating because he's very direct. They've been attracted by his videos on social media platforms. And so there is now a split emerging whereby a good number of young voters who might have been expected to support a left-leaning party, so Labour, the Liberal Democrats, or the Green Party, have now gone over to Reform.
It is interesting that, an election like this, we're talking about, how the main leaders, the main characters in the election, what impact they have on social media. You just mentioned that Nigel Farage seems to have more following than Keir Starmer and even Kemi Badenoch. How much of social media has impacted on this election?
So I think social media has been a big part. The Conservative Party on their side have been pushing these quite strong, compelling visuals of Birmingham City Council. So Birmingham City Council in the UK has had some financial difficulties. And so they have had to renegotiate some contracts with workers who have since gone on strike. And so you have in large parts of Birmingham City Council bins going uncollected. And the Conservative Party have pushed out the pictures of households with bins piling up outside of them, or waste bags rather. They've posted images of rats in the street. And so I think that's had some impacts for the Conservative Party. I think Labour have tried to push a more positive message. They've tried to suggest that their plan for change is working. They've tried to suggest that things are getting better, even if it doesn't feel like it. But I think they've had some difficulties in getting that message through. And then, as we discussed, reform on social media are a big factor now. You find that Nigel Farage's videos have a lot of cut through. They tend to connect with a lot of voters who feel like politicians aren't necessarily speaking their language or that politicians don't really care about them.
Wow. Did we ever think this day and age will come when social media will help to decide who will become the next leader? Well, thanks again, Nathaniel. Thanks for breaking down this election for us.
Of course, good to see you.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has emphasized the last-minute changes added by Kyiv made the U.S.-Ukraine rare earth and mineral extraction agreement truly an equal partnership at his daily address to the nation on Thursday. The deal signed on Wednesday gives the U.S. shared access to revenues from the future sale of minerals and rare earths in Ukraine in return for continued investment in Kyiv's defenses and reconstruction. Its conclusion follows an earlier failed attempt to finalize the deal in February, when talks reportedly broke down during a heated exchange between U.S. President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Vice President of the United States J.D. Vance at the White House. Tensions have persisted, with Trump accusing Ukraine of stalling and prolonging what he referred to as the killing field. According to Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, no modifications have been made by the U.S. side. President Zelensky also announced 3 sanctions packages against companies and individuals that allegedly assist the Russian army and the occupation structures.
I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. This partnership allows the United States to invest alongside Ukraine to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, mobilize American talent, capital, and governance standards that will improve Ukraine's investment climate and accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery. The Development Finance Corporation will participate and help to establish this fund in collaboration with the government of Ukraine. Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. It's time for this cruel and senseless war to end. The killing must stop, and both the United States and the government of Ukraine look forward to quickly operationalizing this historic economic partnership for both the Ukrainian and American people.
However, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says the war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon, just hours after Washington and Kyiv signed that minerals agreement. Speaking to Fox News on Thursday, Vance poured some cold water on earlier statements from the White House, while also claiming that U.S. President Donald Trump managed to secure a really big breakthrough in the peace process, saying it's going to be up to them, that's Ukraine and Russia, to come to an agreement and stop this brutal conflict. Is not going anywhere. It's not going to end anytime soon. Of course, they, that's Ukrainians, he says, are angry that they were invaded, but we're going to continue to lose thousands and thousands of soldiers over a few miles of territory this or that way. I hope both of them come to their senses. Trump suggested just last week that Russia and Ukraine were very close to a deal after his foreign envoy Steve Witkoff spent 3 hours meeting with Putin at the Kremlin. Talks to end the war, which Trump previously promised to do within 24 hours of taking office, have largely stalled despite several top-level meetings and at least 2 direct phone calls between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The U.S. Vice President's comments were no different from the State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce, who confirmed that while a deal has been signed with Ukraine, U.S. officials were not going to fly around the world at the drop of a hat.
Treasury Secretary Bessent also announced the signing of a historic agreement to establish the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. This economic partnership marks a significant milestone in U.S.-Ukraine relations. This initiative will attract private sector investment, create jobs, develop secure supply chains, and drive economic growth, providing a solid foundation for Ukraine's recovery from the war. President Trump envisioned this partnership between the American people and the Ukrainian people to show both sides' commitment to lasting peace and prosperity in Ukraine. With that in mind, President Trump and Secretary Rubio have identified Ambassador Julie Davis to serve as the chargé d'affaires in Kyiv during this critical moment as we move toward a peace agreement to stop the bloodshed. Certainly what I think Ukraine understands and what we intend is that this is not just a financial arrangement. This is a bonding between two countries that will make a difference for a nation, certainly in Ukraine's situation where they have a friend, and the rest of the world will notice that when you have a friend like the United States and when we are in business with you and in your nation, it creates a stronger national security for everyone involved. And certainly in this case, when it comes to the profits that are generated, that is then reinvested into Ukraine for the rebuilding dynamic that is going to obviously have to happen. It's a time where, as the secretaries noted just a few days ago, as I mentioned to you, as a matter of fact, on Tuesday, that it's time for both of the nations involved in this conflict to come up with concrete proposals about how this conflict ends. And this relationship now with Ukraine reinforces the commitment of the United States to that nation.
We're not quite done with the United States. The Trump administration has recorded its first casualty in the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who was relieved of his duties on Thursday. But the administration explained this away, saying the president has another assignment lined up for him. Waltz's exit as security advisor comes weeks after a scandal involving a signal group that mistakenly included a journalist and revealed sensitive military plans against Houthi targets in Yemen. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird has more.
First change in President Trump's administration's inner circle was Mike Waltz, who served as his national security advisor. This was announced in a social media post by President Trump, which stated that Waltz would be the next U.S. representative to the United Nations. This change was unexpected as President Trump did not give any indications in March after the incident, which included the editor of The Atlantic magazine on a private text thread about national security information pertaining to an imminent bombing campaign.
Well, yeah, Mike Waltz, I guess he said he claimed responsibility, I would imagine. Had nothing to do with anyone else. It was Mike, I guess. I don't know. I was told it was Mike. But again, the attacks were unbelievably successful, and that's ultimately what you should be talking about, I think. Mike took responsibility for it.
While President Trump's comments in March didn't give any clear warnings that Waltz may be leaving, U.S. senators showed some signs of agreement with the action.
Pretty big breach. It was a pretty big problem, and I personally, I think he owned up to it, which is noble to begin with, and took full responsibility. That doesn't mean he admitted it was his fault, but he takes full responsibility. I thought that was very noble, and I'm sad to see him go.
Listen, I think it was appropriate that Waltz stepped down. I give him credit for acknowledging the huge mistake made with that very sensitive information, that if it had gotten out, we could have lost pilots. What I would really hope is that Pete Hegseth, who has been much more inept than Mike Waltz, I would definitely invite Secretary Hegseth to come down to Norfolk, Virginia, the home port of the Truman, and explain to the family and friends of those sailors how having that information that could have been released.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be serving as the interim national security advisor as the president seeks a permanent replacement. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
The Trump administration continues to shake things up in the U.S. as the president signed an executive order calling for all federal funding to the Public Broadcasting Service, the PBS, and the National Public Radio, NPR, to be blocked. Yesterday, Trump alleged that both organizations have engaged with bias and partisan news coverage. The order instructs the board of the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, who distributes funding to PBS and NPR stations, to cease direct funding to the maximum extent allowed by law. It adds that the board should decline to provide future funding to the news organizations. More than 40 million Americans listen to NPR public radio each week, 36 million watch a local television station from the PBS network each month, according to their estimates. NPR Director Catherine Meyer estimated in March the radio station would receive about $120 million from the CPB in 2025. That's less than 5% of its budget. Both organizations have previously said that Trump's efforts to cut funding could have a devastating impact on those who rely on them for credible news, including during emergency situations. To the Middle East now, everyone aboard a ship headed towards Gaza that was attacked by Israeli military earlier are said to be safe. It comes as the Freedom Flotilla coalition said its ship, the Conscience, was targeted at 12:30 a.m. local time today and issued an SOS signal right after the attack. The confirmation of safety came from the Maltese government, which also confirmed a fire on board the ship was brought under control overnight. The Freedom Flotilla coalition said it had planned to sail to Gaza with people, including climate activist Greta Thunberg, on board and challenge Israel's illegal siege and blockade. The NGO called for Israeli ambassadors to be summoned to answer for violation of international law, including the ongoing blockade and the bombing of civilian vessels. Reports say at least 65 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours as Israel continues its attacks on the enclave. Reports also say 2 Palestinian journalists were killed in the airstrike. While the IDF is yet to comment on the incident, the U.S. State Department has been deflecting questions about the killing of the journalists. One of them, Al Jazeera journalist Hossam Shabat. The other is Palestine Today's Mohammed Mansour. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said earlier, "I would say that every single thing that's happening is a result of Hamas and its choices to drag that region down into a level of suffering that has been excruciating and has caused innumerable deaths." The Committee to Protect Journalists has condemned the killing of Shabat and Mansour and called for an independent investigation into whether they were deliberately targeted. Meanwhile, Israel has confirmed its fighter jets bombed an area next to the presidential palace in the Syrian capital, Damascus, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to protect the Druze religious minority following days of deadly sectarian violence. Mr. Netanyahu said the strike was a clear message to the Syrian regime that Israel would not allow the deployment of forces south of Damascus or any threat to the Druze community. There was no immediate response from the Syrian government. However, it rejected foreign intervention when Israel carried out strikes south of Damascus on Wednesday during clashes between Druze gunmen, security forces, and allied Sunni Islamist fighters.
The Jewish people will never again lay down their weapons. These arms are the open secret of our survival in the cruel reality of this region. We, the Jewish people, know what it is to be a minority. The Middle East is a tough region for minorities. I call on the international community to fulfill its role in protecting the minorities in Syria, especially the Druze, from the regime and its gangs of terror, and not to turn a blind eye to the tough events taking place there over the recent months. The international community and each and every nation must decide which side they stand on in this historic battle, on the side of Israel or on the side of the axis that seeks its annihilation. Neutrality or balanced approach between the sides is a moral and diplomatic distortion. Other countries also reached out on their own initiative to offer help. I thank the many countries for their good spirit of solidarity and willingness to provide support. Israel is used to assisting countries in times of need, during natural or other disasters. We don't take political or diplomatic considerations into account. This is our values, the values that Israel was founded upon.
Now, Israeli forces or authorities say fires that have ravaged large parts of central Israel since Wednesday have been largely extinguished. More than 150 teams have been battling the blaze, which has scorched around 20 square kilometers of land in the Latran area between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Israel's ambulance service said at least 12 people had been treated for smoke inhalation, but no fatalities have been reported. 17 firefighters were injured, according to Israeli broadcaster Kan. Authorities said hot and dry conditions with strong winds made controlling the fires more challenging, and a senior official warned that they could flare up again. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had declared a national emergency in response to the fires, and hundreds of people evacuated their homes, but an evacuation order for 12 towns near Jerusalem has now been lifted. Meanwhile, police deployed tear gas to disperse demonstrators after fires were set and smoke flares lit during the Labor Day march in Brussels on Thursday. Protesters marched with banners reading "In the face of fascism, let us organize a revolution," chanting, singing and burning flares. They were also seen fleeing from police after hurling objects at the officers. Protest organizers estimated that over 15,000 people from more than 50 associations attended the rallies. Belgium's trade union hailed the demonstration as a powerful display of unity and solidarity.
My husband and my two children, little children, my daughter 9 years and my son 6 years, they stay in Gaza and they are suffering. No food, no water, clean water, and no safe, of course, in this genocide. So we ask the Belgian government to look for us mercy and to look for our families in Gaza and our children. I come here nearly every Wednesday to ask the same question. Where is the Belgian government from this sit-ins, all this, and to look for our family all these months to evacuate them?
What we are asking and demanding the Belgian government to put more efforts to evacuate our families from Gaza, because this is a matter of life and death. They are displacing from place to place. They are facing abnormal, terrible, awful circumstances and situation in Gaza.
Obviously, as we speak,
Let's come to Asia now. Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has accused India of escalating tensions in the region following the Pahalgam attack in Indian administered Jammu and Kashmir, which claimed the lives of 26 people, many of them Indian tourists. Speaking at a press conference in Islamabad on Wednesday, Dar described the situation as a serious threat to peace and stability and criticized India for creating a politically motivated and highly provocative environment. At least 26 people were killed, mostly tourists, in an attack that took place on April 22nd in Kashmir, a disputed region claimed by both Pakistan and India. Delhi has accused Pakistan of being involved in the attack, which Islamabad has repeatedly denied.
Obviously, as we speak, the entire region is facing a serious threat to its peace and stability owing to the politically motivated and highly provocative environment being created by India in the wake of Pahalgam attack in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It is unfortunate that India continues to weaponize unsubstantiated accusations and allegations as part of its disinformation strategy for narrow political ends. This is not the first time that India has resorted to such tactics. They have done it before and they have resorted again to the same what they did in Pulwama incident and earlier ones. In fact, this has now become a very familiar template aimed at diverting attention from India's inability to suppress the inalienable right of the Kashmiris to self-determination. its security failures in illegally Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, as well as its decades-long state terrorism and oppression. To distract the international community's attention from the horrors of what's happening in the Indian illegally held Kashmir, India deliberately raises tensions with Pakistan. A durable solution for India lies in focusing on its internal problems instead of raising fingers on other countries. India has been deploying the allegations of terrorism to achieve its strategic objective for long.
Well, it's now official. The new German government will take their roles in the next few days. Friedrich Merz's CDU party voted to give the economy ministry to former politician and energy executive Katharina Reich. For more on the new appointees and what to expect from the German economy in the next few years, here's Deutsche Welle's Vada Imran joining us from Berlin. Vada, great to see you. It's no secret that the German economy is struggling. What are some of the biggest challenges that the minister will likely face?
Hi, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's a new beginning of sorts for Germany with a new incoming government. And this one seems to be quite different from the last. A lot more executives, managers, bosses than politicians, I think. But first, let's talk about the challenges. One of the biggest issues is the periods of stagnation or contractions. So essentially resulting in no GDP growth for Germany. We're expecting a third such year this year in 2025. And the new Minister Katharina Reich, whose last position was CEO of an energy company, will be looking to somehow revive and kickstart this economy. Another big issue is, of course, high energy costs and also high costs of bureaucracy and operations. And these are complaints we hear from both companies and residents. So basically, the new minister will inherit an economy tainted by these domestic factors, but also by threats of trade wars and tariffs. And among all this is one silver lining, which is that there could be more focus on the green energy transition, as renewables could potentially help loosen up these high energy prices if implemented in the right way. And we're hearing that this is going to be one big priority of the new ministry.
Yeah, the economic realities on the ground. And the economy ministry will now also be responsible for energy policy. What does that say about the incoming government's attitude towards climate goals?
Yes, protecting the climate has been a top priority for Germans, and securing a reliable energy source is a top priority for the government. So the aim, I think, will be to take these two things together. And this is new, the shuffling of responsibilities and the inclusion of energy in the largely economy ministry. This is new for this particular government. And many analysts here are of the opinion that Katharina Reich, with her experience at the energy company that she was heading, will be able to navigate the intersection of energy and economy better. The hope is that her years of corporate experience will positively impact policymaking and decision-making here in Germany. However, Germany doesn't really encourage executives to become politicians and vice versa. But the new government is trying to change that and bring more executives to the table. And generally, the CDU is generally not too keen on green policy. So the appointment of an energy executive as economy minister does seem like a strategy shift for the party as a whole to place more focus on the climate and energy crisis.
There's a lot resting on Reich's shoulders. Just wondering how the appointment will be viewed by Germans and German companies, Vada.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken to a lot of lobby groups, transparency groups, and independent economists. And while much of the sentiment is positive, transparency and lobby groups are saying that it's problematic when people with such close ties to the industry take on ministerial positions, you know, going from CEO to federal minister, because then we can't say for sure if the necessary critical distance is maintained. This is a statement from transparency groups. And if lobbying efforts are assigned, line, then the fossil fuel lobby here is a massive one with a lot of money at their disposal. So there is a lot of worry here that this may impact decision making. But many major German companies have hailed this appointment. One thing we're constantly hearing, like I mentioned earlier, is the need to reduce electricity prices. And there is a lot of trust in Katharina Reiche that's shown by employer associations or family entrepreneurs association, and they're saying good things. And when we talk about residents, I think personally, many people here are just keen to see if the new government will pull through on their big promises and bring the much needed relief for residents. Ultimately, I think that's what's going on in residents' minds here. Is this government going to provide that relief, or are things going to get much worse? But we're expecting to hear about this very, very soon. The new government is supposed to take charge by early next week.
Well, we have a lot to look out for in Germany, don't we, Vada? Thanks again for bringing us this update. I mean, one of the world's leading events on humanitarian aid and development, the Dubai Humanitarian Aid Summit, has ended in the United Arab Emirates. The international humanitarian community hosted about 500 people, representing more than 68 nationalities, comprising the United Nations organizations, non-profits and non-governmental organizations, in addition to commercial companies. The Dubai Humanitarian is celebrating more than 20 years of humanitarian action. It's an independent humanitarian free zone authority serving populations affected by disasters in the Pacific Islands as well as into the Caribbean. 2/3 of the world's population living in hazard-prone areas. Officials say this is due to Dubai's strategic geographic position on the path between the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and the Dubai Humanitarian Summit being located the organization, beg your pardon, being located about 10 minutes away from the Jebel Ali seaport in Al Maktoum. Well, much earlier, my colleague Layo Larinde spoke to Nigerian humanitarian activist Ero Ibafidon, who was in attendance at the summit, on the highlights in Dubai.
The summit is very strategic and is actually in line with the path for the future, which is the UN path for the future, and the Dubai Humanitarian Organization decide to actually start their work and preparation towards the path to the future. And what this conference was about is basically to get collaboration from other stakeholders, humanitarian stakeholders globally, to actually get to pick up their brains on different areas of what can be done in order to have a fruitful future for all with no one being left behind. This conference is actually meant to help pick up brains from other humanitarian organizations and individuals. And people came up with various initiatives that could help in strengthening the path for the future. Some strategic initiatives were picked up, digital initiatives that could help propel the ones in underserved community. Like I mentioned today during one of the sections, I highlighted the need for us to have a world future where no one is left behind. With this new technology of AI, we need to be able to carry everybody along. And by doing so, we need to start looking out to reach out to more of the underserved communities. The government should concentrate on localization of organizations, NGOs. Like today, the United Nations Resident Coordinator for the UAE, she mentioned in one of the sections that the need for collaboration is very, very important. That was why she said, she even used our African phrase that if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go with others. So there is need for us for collaboration, and there is need for the government to start collaborating with local NGOs in order to reach more to these communities. Because the government, I don't believe they can do it alone, but if they understand the importance of local NGOs, localizing these things, it will definitely go a long way into reaching out to those more vulnerable communities across Africa. And I believe the government have a huge role to play in actually working with stakeholders, humanitarian stakeholders, to reach out to more of those vulnerable communities across Africa.
The estranged husband of a woman who served a poisonous mushroom lunch to her family says it was very rare for her to hold social gatherings at home. Simon Patterson was invited to the fatal meal prepared by Erin Patterson, but decided not to attend the day before. Mr. Patterson is the first witness in the trial of Miss Patterson, who's charged with the murder of 3 relatives and the attempted murder of another, with a case of centering on a beef Wellington lunch at her house in July 2023. This happened in Australia. Miss Patterson has pleaded not guilty, and her defense team says she panicked after unintentionally serving poison to family members she loved. 3 people died in hospital in the days after the meal, including Mr. Patterson's former in-laws, Don Patterson and Gail Patterson, as well as Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Local pastor Ian Wilkinson survived after weeks of treatment in hospital. Industry leaders, policymakers and government officials gathered for South Africa-Nigeria private sector engagement session hosted by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition in partnership with MTN Group. The session underscored the need to strengthen economic cooperation between South Africa and Nigeria, 2 of Africa's largest and most influential economies, for the success of the African continent. It also brought together South African companies already operating in Nigeria, along with those exploring new business opportunities in the region. I do apologize for that. A new photograph showing a smiling Princess Charlotte, the 3rd in line to the British throne, has been released by Kensington Palace to mark her 10th birthday. The image was taken by her mother, Catherine, Princess of Wales, using an iPhone during a trip to Cumbria earlier this year. A photograph was put on to the Kensington Palace social media channels with the message, "Happy 10th birthday, Princess Charlotte," along with a heart emoji. Thousands of synchronized drones illuminated Hong Kong's Victoria Harbour for Labor Day celebrations, attracting spectators with a 12-minute display that celebrated the city's vibrant culture. The event featured fireworks and traditional buns, honoring beloved festivals such as the Chong Chau Bun Festival and the Tin Hau Festival. Those are approximately 1,500 synchronized drones equipped with LED lights and programmed to play cultural music.
So I always see so many fireworks, like 1 year, 2, 3 times. So that is the good things. Yeah, so like this, maybe Hong Kong can attract so many tourism, and Hong Kong tourism will go good.
And I work in the mainland China as a teacher, and I will be spending my holiday here since we have this 5-day holiday in China. So yes, I guess this drone shots would really attract a lot of tourists to come over to Hong Kong.
I think the dragon moving, turning its head, I thought it was pretty cool. The 3D motion itself, I thought it was pretty cool. And what the drone show represented for me, it's like an overall representation of the Chinese culture.
That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.